Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today, as the title suggests, we're going to talk a little bit about how to prevent callouts during the holiday season. Today, I'm joined by Scott Witte. He is the co-founder at Abridged Solutions. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Meredith, for having me.
Awesome. So to give everyone a quick run through on our Big Marker webinar platform here, for those that have come, I'm sure you already know, we have the chat box to the right. Feel free to throw in any questions that you have throughout the webinar. We're going to do a formal Q&A at the very end, last 15 minutes or so. So I'll be sure to keep an eye out on that and make sure every question gets answered. To get everyone used to it, I'd love to hear where you're dialing in from. So I'm coming in from Chicago. Beautiful Chicago, where it's, cool 30 degrees out right now, but hopefully, won't be too bad of a winter. So I'd love to hear where everyone's coming in from. Yep, Scott's coming in from South Carolina, so rubbing it in perfectly. Thank you, Scott.
True.
Awesome. And then we do have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar itself. Those will just slide up right on the bottom left of your screen. Again, it's just a really good way for me to interact with everybody, to see where everybody's heads are at, and so you guys can communicate with each other. We do have an audit at the very end. This will just help gauge your holiday policy call-out protocols that you have already in place. We are offering a lucky winner on a $100 Amazon gift card. So if you fill it out, keep an eye out on your inboxes, and you could just win that gift card. And I mean, perfect timing. The holidays are coming up. Finally, if you are a member of SHRM or HRCI, we recently just became a certified provider. We are partnering with them to offer credits, so PDC IDs, through this webinar. So I will be sure to give those ID codes at the very end of the webinar. So be sure to stick around for its entirety. And finally, just to give a little info on workforce.com and what we do here. So we're a workforce management software company who specializes in scheduling and time and attendance. And really, our overarching goal is just to help business leaders and frontline managers make the best decisions for their company at the end of the day. Cool. Scott, I would love for you to introduce yourself, kind of give a little insight on Abridged Solutions, and just talk about what you guys do.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Meredith. So yeah, my name is Scott Witte. I am the co-founder of Abridged Solutions, and it really spun off from our live agent call center called Call Experts. So our live service, we handle a lot of appointment setting. We do everything from HVAC, emergency, medical. We pretty much would take on any project if you need a live answering right off the bat. And then what we did is we realized we were doing a lot of HR call out lines. So for manufacturing companies, hospitality, retail, universities, and we decided to shrink those costs by almost 30% in some ways and provide a more reliable solution. So that's where Abridged Solutions came from, along with now creating mass communication as well through texting, email, phone calls, things of that nature.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we'll definitely go into the benefits of technology and, where it comes into play with something as complicated as managing callouts and, coming from an operational and an HR approach. So I think that'll be really interesting. Tell me about some of the industries that you work with. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned manufacturing. We do aerospace. We have retail, grocery, universities. There's a lot of different use cases, and it's interesting to see how each industry as well as organization is kind of creating their own processes, policies around attendance, and what that means, especially with FMLA, or if you're sick, or childcare, if you can use PTO, right, or you have to use different buckets, and how that all kind of correlates together. So we're really branching out, I think, into a lot more industries than we thought we were initially.
Yeah, definitely. There's always space for how to better prevent callouts within the hourly workforce, for sure.
Absolutely.
It seems like you wear a lot of hats. So as a co-founder, you also are helping to actually run the call center itself. So as a business owner and an operator, how does your day-to-day come into play when dealing with your own callouts with your call center?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, callouts have a massive impact on our business. We have strict SLAs we need to meet. We have emergency phone calls. We have people that are in hospital or calling their doctor and need to get a hold of them. So if we have a call out, it has a massive impact. And that's where we really have to focus on teamwork, that team mentality. It's not just you that might have an issue. Now you're putting stress on another coworker.
Definitely.
So we've had days where, I mean, even the CEO is on the calls, taking calls. and
Yeah,
where you
wow.
have massive spikes, and it's just all hands on deck, and let's get to work and make sure we provide the best service possible.
Definitely. And I think a lot of that energy comes through during this time of year specifically, where you kind of feel like, everything's moving really quickly. There's the aspect of dealing with the customers, of course, especially if you're in retail, let's say the holiday shopping is in full force, I'm assuming, and making sure that everybody is helping each other out where, you have your C-suite, you're like your CEO helping out to make sure that things are running smoothly. I think a lot of people can relate around this time of year for sure.
100%.
Yeah. So, I'm curious going into more of absenteeism rates. What are some of the differences in these rates between the holiday season and maybe a quieter time of year, like midsummer, let's say?
Yeah. So last year, for instance, we saw most of our clients actually had their rates double. So
Mm,
a
wow.
lot of the December, right around that Christmas, New Year's, was a huge spike.
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out this year. We've seen a lot more companies utilize temp agencies, so they're bringing on more help during this time. So we're actually building out different databases and managing the temp agents, employees versus the full-time or real employees. And then also, with all the discussion about a recession, will people be more focused on taking on overtime? And you do see that as well play into it. So
Yeah.
definitely a higher volume last year, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out this year.
Yeah. And, you talked about how the rates have doubled around this time of year. And we found this really great article from Fast Company. And it calculated, it had this very interesting study within the article itself. And I'm happy to share this around if people are interested on what sick days are really used for and how often they're used throughout the calendar year. And you can see in this last quote, it says people are significantly more likely to call in sick near a holiday. The day after Christmas had the highest surge rate with an almost 400% increase. To put that in perspective, a normal surge is closer to 100%. So in general, the closer the holidays to a weekend, the greater the chance of people calling in sick. So I'm curious if the audience, feel free to chime in here. Have you guys experienced this, especially this year where a lot of the holidays, Christmas Eve, and I believe New Year's, all are on the weekend. So I'm assuming a lot of people are taking off the Friday or Monday beforehand. I'm curious, Scott, if this is something that you've seen possibly, and, phones are
Yeah,
ringing off the
absolutely.
hook.
This is such a funny stat, and it's right on point. I looked at all of our clients and their dashboards and the graphs, and literally December to January, there's all just straight lines, basically,
Yeah,
to the point, and then you have a huge drop off. But this is a very true stat, and it's real, and companies have to account for it the best they
definitely.
can.
Yeah, definitely. And, we'll go into more on how they can better account for it. And, some of these articles that I've been reading personally and our team has been looking into have found some successes and some failures behind. But first, before we go into that, I'm curious, talking about the number one culprit behind call out. So how much is burnout, a concept that we've been hearing more and more since COVID has come about? How much is burnout to blame when it comes to increased rates of call outs and or absenteeism rates?
Burnout is definitely a real topic that needs to be discussed. I saw some article or some quote. It was 44% of employees have experienced burnout within
Hmm.
the past 2 years. So it's something companies definitely have to deal with. They need to focus on, I think, health and wellness, making sure people aren't overstressed, especially with the holidays. Now everyone's to-do list, right, is a little longer, and people are getting sick. Right. And
Right.
that's a real thing. People are more likely to get sick during the colder weathers. They're indoors and during this holiday season as well. So that burnout definitely just elevates itself. That needs to be really communicated. And those conversations need to be had within the organization to make sure that you're on top of it and managing it accordingly.
And just out of curiosity, how would you define burnout just from a manager and, a co-founder perspective?
I think the easiest word is probably just overwhelmed, right? Someone that's
Yeah,
just stressed out and everything's coming at them at once and they don't really know how to handle it.
right.
It's really just kind of raising your hand and say, hey, I'm having a tough time. I need help, right? And then getting that help that you need, whichever direction that might be.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to talk about an employee raising their hand and, owning up to how they're feeling at the end of the day. And I think we've had a lot of conversations with HR professionals and consultants talking about how to best deal with that. And I think there's a cultural mindset of the American way of just working and not necessarily voicing that, mental health struggle per se. And it's hard, and I think there's a bridge that needs to be built in order to bridge the gap between the managers and the frontline staff and feeling comfortable to share, hey, I'm not like performing how I maybe was a couple months ago because I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling like, burnout to this extent, whatever it is. And it's hard to classify that sometimes too, because burnout has a lot of different categories that it could fall under in terms of how it's emotionally, brought on by some employee.
100%. And one little tweak can make a huge difference. We had one employee, it was just, he had to do script writing, and there's too many accounts coming on board, and it was very overwhelming, right? Or another one had research, and they just needed help in one area, and then they could speed up so much faster in other areas. So it's really kind of that awareness from the employee as well as the manager to see, hey, what's getting backed up, or what causes you the most stress? What's that one thing maybe I could take off your plate that we could really speed up and get all this other work done to alleviate
Got it.
pain points.
And was it that employee that came to you guys in the sense of saying, hey, I need more help? Or did the manager notice, hey, it seems like he needs some assistance here?
This one was a sense of both, right? And it was pretty apparent.
Yeah,
Scripts were all
definitely.
piling up, and you could just see them overwhelming. And, it really was just, hey, what do we need to do here? And having that conversation as, you're an amazing employee, the clients, everybody appreciates all that you do, other employees, you're willing to help out, but it's this list that seems to be the issue. So it's kind of that, maybe there's a better process.
Right. There was a bottleneck effect, and it was clear as to what was creating
So
that.
I think it was the manager kind of noticing an issue, but also the employee having that awareness to be, and the comfort to be able to have the tough conversation and say, you know what, this is really just bogging me down and I'm stressed.
Yeah.
And we were able to get those clients onboarded and help that employee out.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, I sent out a poll question a couple minutes ago. I'm asking, how much has burnout been a topic of discussion amongst your staff? And it seems like majority are saying greatly over the past couple of years. We have some, around 25% saying I've heard it brought up a handful of times, maybe not so much. And then around 10% saying hardly ever. So it's interesting to kind of see across the board how much it's ranging from business to business. Of course, if we go more into this, it would be interesting to see the size of these businesses that might have not heard any sort of burnout, where people who are saying hardly ever versus greatly are ranging in terms of the hierarchy. So yeah, that's really interesting. In an article that you posted last year on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share that with the audience as well, you talked a little bit about the Christmas crunch. First of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about what that is and to what degree the holidays or this Christmas crunch exacerbates burnout.
Yeah, I think it definitely exacerbates burnout. Unfortunately, I think the Christmas crunch, I think even Hanukkah and all the holidays, kind of New Year's coming in together, some companies shut down. So there's just a lot of emotions all around, I think, the Christmas crunch and the expectations that everyone sets every year, right? Either you have to have the perfect gift, or you don't have enough money for the right gift, or there's too many tasks, and some companies shut down. So then in sales, you want to get it closed, you have the end of the quarter. So the Christmas crunch is definitely a topic, and it's really just making sure that you're aware of that, especially now. It's kind of funny. We're actually going into a Mercury retrograde, which is just going to enhance everything else, right? Expect everything to be delayed a little bit or whatnot. So this will definitely be a year of awareness for sure.
Definitely. In this article that I actually just sent out in the chat, written by Scott, he talked a little bit about some of the top practices, and we're going to go over them here in this slide. For Scott, what are some of the top practices that you suggested in the past that's worked well, specifically for hourly workforce, kind of pertaining to this slide that we're seeing here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, mostly, for us, look, we talk about implementing something that's extremely simple, that's clear, right? Easily to utilize. So for us, right, we're promoting the call out platform. So it's an automated system. You dial in, and it really just is a couple step process, and then make sure that that notification gets to the right individual. Kind of similar to your platform where someone can just pick a new shift. But ours is just notifying the supervisor, hey, someone's not coming in. You might need to get someone else to fill that shift.
Right.
So it's really focusing on making sure that the employees understand the practice or the policy and the systems and how they utilize them in order to keep productivity as high as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to point to this first bullet point that we have here, understanding your non-negotiables. So can you give some more insight as specifically what non-negotiables might mean during this time of year that has proven effective?
I think one is, I kind of mentioned it. It's kind of the awareness and making sure that you're taking care of yourself while taking care of the other employees, right? And thinking of other people. If you are planning, a vacation or someone's sick in your family, and taking the right protocols in place to notifying, hey, my child's sick, something might occur. So it kind of revolves around those type of non-negotiables.
Yeah, definitely. And, how do those simple routines, self-care routines, help to lower call out rates? I think that's such an interesting point that you added in there, but it's important, it does touch on that human element that really comes into play with any business, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think simple routines, a morning routine, right, is waking up. For me, it's a cold shower, right? Yeah. Or it's a quick little exercise, maybe a breathing exercise, and taking that self-care in order to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. I know Mel Robbins does the high five, right, to get yourself confident and ready that you're going to be able to handle or take on anything that's coming your way for that day. So the routines are critical. Even when it comes into the office, it's all right, knowing, hey, we're going to have our huddle, right? What are the 5 topics, right? We need to go over our metrics. We need to go over our opportunities. Okay, what are our challenges that we're going to face? And always having kind of a little mini backup plan if this happens, right? And then having that downtime so we know that we have that project time that we need to focus on. And some of those just kind of niches allow for other things to kind of come in that are unexpected and to be able to handle them accordingly.
Right. And I think with any self-care routine, it really is about making sure that, hey, I'm checking in with myself. I'm giving myself this time so I can show up for others. And Absolutely. Others in this case being your team, and making sure that you are ready for anything if something happens where, God forbid, 5 people on the floor are calling out within an hour, and you're scrambling to still uphold that customer experience for your company. You have given yourself those couple moments, whether it's in the morning, at night, whatever it is, to just reset and make sure that you can essentially show up and show out for your company.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do the Tony Robbins priming sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
In our team huddles, just to make sure that people are really taking the time and force people to do that sometimes, because these are definitely busy times for everybody.
Definitely. Do you have any resources that you'd like, to share, whether it's a podcast, anything like that has been proven effective, whether it's for yourself personally or your team?
Yeah, I don't have like a link or anything that I can send right away, but the people that I follow, Wim Hof breathing is pretty amazing. Sure. I've been able to hold my breath for over 4 minutes just doing some quick breathing exercises, which is nuts, because if I were to do it right now, it would probably be 30 seconds.
Right.
And Tony Robbins, I think the priming, Mel Robbins is a great lady to follow as well, just to, I think, really change your state. Right. And allow all of these different thoughts, emotions to come in. But it's kind of like I have a close friend that says, picture a leaf, right? And there are all these different emotions hitting a river, and then just letting it flow down and letting everything flow the way it should. Right.
Definitely.
And accordingly, and knowing that everything is going to be all right at the end of the day. For
sure. Yeah, there's definitely some great resources out there. Wim Hof is amazing. And there's some great podcasts out there as well. For me personally, I love Andrew Huberman. He's amazing. If you're curious into that health and wellness stuff, and just, again, setting your morning routine up for success, he's a great person to start with. Yeah, that's great.
There's one other one that changed my life, actually. That was called the X3 bar by Dr. Jan Jaquish. So I highly recommend that. I was a huge gym guy, and now I work out in 15 to 20 minutes, and I do it every day, and I've never felt better. So
That's
that
awesome.
is probably the number one changer that I've done in the past 3 years.
Right, exactly. And again, these self-care routines don't need to take hours long. It doesn't need to go into your morning too much. You don't need to wake up 3 hours prior to maybe what you're used to. But it's about, again, just those little incremental changes, I think, make such a big difference in your performance as a manager or, as somebody who's, in the care of frontline employees.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that we're talking about that because it's difficult to find these tools. And some of these
Yeah,
tools are so valuable and make such an impact on people's lives if they just know how to do it. But even I said cold shower, there's still a process as to how to do a cold shower. I don't turn it cold and
totally.
jump into it, right?
Right.
So it's learning those little techniques that can really make a big difference once you actually get into doing it.
Oh, hands down. Yeah, this can be a whole nother webinar, trust me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely, definitely. Awesome. And then, we're talking a lot about self-care. We're talking about some, practices that essentially set you up for success. But where does technology come into play in all of this? And, curious as to where Abridged Solutions might have part in some of these top practices.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons we created this, to be honest, was to make it as simple and as niched as possible so that it really hits a core need, right?
Mhm.
And solves a problem. And technology can be overwhelming, right? If you've ever implemented a CRM system, so to speak, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of different ways you can do things. What
Mhm.
is a lead? What is an opportunity? What is an account? How does your business define that and handle it? And I think it's really important to make sure that when using technology, whether you're using it in a group, you collaborate so everyone has a say and is heard and understands the direction and the vision to how we're going to use this. And then also, if you're going to pick and choose individually, it's making sure that it doesn't add more work, right? And frustration. And there's so many great tools, whether it's Canva or other websites, right, that help you send posts on social media or linking
Sure.
LinkedIn and Instagram. But then how long is it taking you to learn those, right? And then actually implement it and then stick with it. I think technology can be so powerful as long as it's presented and useful and specific to its need, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And, in today's world, there's so much technology out there, and it's really hard to feel like you're trying to sort your way through it and find the right match. I think there's a lot of good resources like G2 out
Absolutely.
there to look through and compare all the different sorts of technology. And especially when it comes to call outs, things like Abridged Solutions and Workforce are tools that managers essentially will have in their tool belt for as long as they desire, however they want to use it, as big as their company might grow. I think it's a really good support system at the end of the day is really what it is.
Absolutely. Especially the hospitality industry, I think for workforce. I mean, to be able to pick up a shift and switch a shift.
Mm,
In Charleston, we're a huge foodie town, and
yes.
it's very, very difficult to find not only a reservation, but staff to be able to fill those shifts because there are so many restaurants. So
Oh,
definitely
for
a great tool.
sure. For sure. Yeah. It's especially nowadays in the hospitality industry, it's a struggle to, it's sad to see all the help wanted signs in the windows
Yeah.
and, the please be patient with us signs when you're checking
Yep.
in for your reservation, whatever it is. But yeah, definitely. And, being able to help managers in any way possible, because I mean, they're the ones at the end of the day that really are having to put up with the recession, with the
Right.
impact of COVID, especially within the restaurant and hospitality industry. So anything that we can do to help, we're happy to do that and talk you through it at the end of the day. Yeah. So, again, going back to your article, talking a little bit about PTO, vacation, and holiday policies. What do you think makes a good holiday policy or vacation policy?
So I'll kind of go back to what I talked about, just simple, clear guidelines, right? Make sure that you know what the eligibility requirements are,
Mm,
have deadlines, right? So when you can take the PTO and getting ahead of it, right? Being as proactive as possible instead of reactive and not really knowing what's going to happen. Utilizing maybe a workforce platform to say, or my platform and showing what happened last year. Okay, if
mm,
that happens again this year, are we prepared? Having those conversations with employees and offer holiday pay. I think there's 96% of maybe it's private companies or companies are offering holiday pay. So for the amount of people that want to take off, there's almost at least half that want to fill those shifts and work those extra hours. So
mm.
it's really just making sure you get ahead of it ahead of time and communicating it as clear to the team so everybody has that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a good point, honestly, that there's almost a opposite reaction to every action that you're going to have. So
They really
going into the
do.
policy making and, HR, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with that aspect of really upgrading and tweaking your policy when you get a chance to. And I'm sure that it's changed, if you look at your holiday policy or your PTO policy 5 years ago compared to now, I'm sure it looks dramatically different, especially considering post-COVID world that we're living in. So I asked the question, what does your vacation policy look like in the poll question? And, a lot of people are saying vacation request in advance, a couple of days notice based on supervisor approval was one answer. We use PTO based off years of service. So it sounds like that's more accrual, which I think is great. I think in terms of the size of your business, it's really interesting to talk about. And Scott, I'm curious, how do these policies, how should they range in terms of how big a company is?
I think size does matter to an extent, but it's almost the type of business, right? I mean, some businesses are 24/7, like our call center. So we don't really have the luxury of just kind of shutting down or turning off and giving everyone, the Christmas vacation or the Hanukkah vacation that they want. So it's really communicating where can we compromise, right? And maybe you take Christmas and I take Thanksgiving. And then, I mean, for all the large companies we work with companies that are 10,000 plus. They're very strict,
Right.
and some of them have unions, right? So there are definitely policies in place that they know what's going to happen, and they're very clear on what needs to happen, when they need to happen. And to be honest, they're bringing in temp employees as well to cover some of those call outs or some of those unique situations. So.
Interesting. And, when we were doing our research, we have seen a lot of people implementing strict deadlines when it comes to the holiday season.
Absolutely.
So we've seen people go as far back as end of September. You have to all have your PTO submitted for the rest of the year. It's a way to help mitigate managers and being, overwhelmed by having to find, replacements for everybody who's taking PTO on the days that are most expected. So my question for you is, should there be a strict deadline to submit vacation days prior to the holidays? And if so, what does that look like?
I think so. You're right. Most of the clients we work with are probably in that October, November range. But yeah, I think everybody needs to understand that we're a part of a vision and we have a duty to everyone, right? To not only the employees, to the company, but to the customers, right? And how are we all going to work together? So it's imperative, just like you plan your own personal calendar, right? Whether you have kids and need to plan baseball or activities or take them on a vacation, it's just another thing that you're helping everybody out by being proactive and not being more reactive.
Yeah, definitely. I want to highlight somebody's question or answer really quickly from the poll question. The question being, what does your vacation policy look like? Somebody answered, we are updating it based on what's happened this year. We're in retail, so we are adding verbiage that is to be requested by 10/31, so end of October, to prevent last minute PTO requests in November and December. So do you think that end of October is typically where you've seen a lot of these PTO deadlines happen?
From my perspective, yes.
Right. Interesting. And I'm curious, as a follow-up question to who filled out that poll, how has that worked for you guys this year? Being that we're in mid-December, the holidays are coming up. Has everybody submitted their PTO? Has there been anyone falling through the cracks, anything like that? So I'm just curious as a follow-up. Awesome.
From my perspective, from what we've seen, there has to be that follow-up, right? And that's where the manager has to go, because people aren't necessarily going to just go ahead and fill that out just because you said it once. There has to be that consistent communication. Hey, I know you didn't fill this out. And it takes a lot of effort. HR does an amazing job and they have a ton on their plate. And that's just one of those things, that the constant follow-up. Did you fill out your paperwork? Did you get this done, right? Open enrollment. That's just another one of those tasks that has to be followed up, and we need to make sure that we have everyone that's signed off that is taking PTO or they're not, especially in our type of business.
Definitely. Yeah. And Laura, I see that you followed up. Thank you so much. She said, we haven't implemented it yet, but we're going to effect next year. So that'll be really interesting to see. And I think you're not the only one. I think a lot of companies are wanting this deadline to be more of a requirement than it is, privilege, let's say. So that's really interesting. I would love to talk a little bit about, again, going into the aspect of policy creation. So what are some considerations HR and operations should take when creating or upgrading their holiday policy?
Considerations, I think it's from what we've seen through our different dashboards is maybe what are the busiest shifts, right? A first shift, a second shift, a third shift, budgeting, right? So knowing that X amount of people are calling off on different shifts, are you willing to pay that overtime, right? And how are you going to handle that accordingly? Or are you going to bring in different temp people? So those are just a couple of the topics that we see on our end.
Yeah, definitely. And then what if policy is broken? What's the action that you guys have taken within your call out center or even that you've seen with some of the industries that you've worked with?
That's a difficult topic, to be honest, is some companies we see are not in a place to let people go, right? It's that difficult of a situation that they need them. And, there's situations, like I said, where all hands on deck. So the entire IT team, customer care has to step up and the conversation really just needs to be had. We're all a team, right? And you understand every certain circumstance might be a little bit different, but there also has to be that accountability.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't allow that a few people maybe to abuse the policy because then it's going to affect everybody else in the company. So every company I think needs to have that line and define what that line in the sand is as to what they're going to tolerate and what they can't.
Definitely. And what's the best way that HR can enforce this policy while also retaining staff in the best possible way?
And I think that a lot of what we see is through point systems that work well. So we'll have, set policy that we implement that we see for manufacturing companies. They get X amount of points if they call out for different reasons, or if they're running late, right, or if they have to leave early. And then depending on those point systems, and the automatic notification might go to the supervisor to say, hey, discussions need to be had. And then if it happens within a certain time frame, so we can calculate, okay, if they've had 3 within a month, then and they've already had a warning, right, then it goes to escalation and you let go. So there definitely always is that clear, finite, policy set in place for the companies that we work with.
Yeah. And again, you've touched on this a couple of times, the aspect of clearly communicating and consistently communicating to staff and making sure that they know what's expected of them just as much as, they're expecting things of you as upper managers or just their frontline managers. I think it's so important. And, that's where the HR aspect comes in and ties in with the operational component of that human element that, of course, it takes to run the business itself. So I think it's really important that, we're clearly communicating that respect and, the aspect of, hey, you knew the policy creation considerations that we have taken into account. And, this is how we're going to enforce it. So, yeah, I think that's really
And a lot of people honestly don't know what their PTO is or where they are. So it's important to have those conversations. I think that's one of the benefits of providing that deadline is to review that, right? I don't know if you know how many PTO days. I don't think I know how many PTO days I have at the moment. But once you know that, and then knowing, hey, where do I fall in that line if I do get sick, right? And keeping people aware makes it, I think, that much easier to have those conversations and to be prepared.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I know I have messaged our own HR about PTO and like what that looks like. And I'm making sure to communicate it with her that, hey, I think that this is something that should be talked about company wide. And, she's done a really great job of that and making sure that, hey, just want to let everybody know, like, we have our floating holidays. Make sure you use those first before you use your PTO, that sort of thing. So, it obviously ranges from industry to industry. And even Brandy brought up a great point. She said, we're in healthcare as well. And the admin team gets to give one first, second, and third choice of holiday. They went off and we were required to work at least one of the 3 major holidays. So I think, that is communication right there and getting, hey, here's the options, but also you are required to work at least one of the 3. So I think that's amazing. And just to shout out Corinne and Laura, we do see your questions. I will definitely get around to those during the Q&A section. So thank you so much. And for those who have questions, throw them in the chat. We will definitely cover those at the end. Awesome. And, talking a little bit about HR and communication aspect and team utilization. So why is respect and appreciation important to convey when talking with your staff?
Oh, sorry, you drowned out a little bit there at the end.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Why is communicating respect, so important when talking to your staff?
Oh, gotcha. I mean, I think that's the foundation, right? Those are the basics that we need to have that open dialogue. We need to have those conversations in order for the employee to feel comfortable, but also confident that they're not in jeopardy, or that they know what the policies are, or that they're not then communicating to other employees and confusing them, right? And causing commotion in certain ways. So I think it's respecting the organization, your employees, your coworkers, colleagues, and yourself, to make sure that you're completely knowledgeable and understand exactly what's going on for the benefit of everyone.
And someone who wears, a lot of hats in his business, how do you communicate with your staff? Just out of curiosity, someone who is a co-founder, someone who's on the floor and helping out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of those guys that I like to put myself in other people's shoes, right? So I start with empathy, understanding, and really figuring out what is the pain points, or what are they going through? How can I help? And then where can they help us, right? And be accountable and say, okay, where's that give and take really that we can work together? So it's starting from, hey, I get it.
Yeah.
But let's focus on the solutions and not the problems at hand.
Definitely. Just out of curiosity, where did you learn that aspect of empathy? Because I think a lot of those who are C-suite and up and, upper managers are kind of checked out, especially if they have a really big company that they're keeping track of, where they think HR would deal with it. HR would deal with the empathetical aspect. They're going to be the ones to convey that respect, where I do think it touches, and it should touch on every team and every team lead, no matter how high up the ladder you are.
So absolutely, 100%. I think a part of it definitely came from me being on the phones. So I used to own a call center and just a small answering service. And it was listening to all the different, everyone had a complaint, right? Whether it was a property management, whether it was someone that was sick, and really trying to understand their situation, and then knowing the company had certain policies in place that I was allowed to follow. So I wasn't allowed to escalate sometimes to the owner or to get this message, when deep down I was like, no, you have to help this lady. There's something else going on, right? So it was kind of putting myself in those shoes, and then empathizing with all of my employees that were really having significant challenges, whether it was health or whatnot. And then to figure out, okay, I understand life happens. And then me personally, right? I've been injured or haven't been able to work or done some things where I understand kids, right? I mean, when kids get sick, it's what are you going to do? Everything's all about them, and being able to have that flexibility, but also being able to make sure that you can maybe find someone to cover your shift, or do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think again, what COVID has done is really exacerbate that need for work-life balance. And I think if you are a manager that can really, again, empathize with that and know that life happens and it's going to go on, and work might not be everything in that moment, is really important, because we're also in a period where retention of staff is insanely important, right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic, by the way.
Oh my gosh,
turnover that we've seen.
We have so many webinars on that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is key, and that's why I asked the question earlier. How can HR come and really promote this policy and enforce the policy itself of PTO, and making sure that PTO policy isn't broken, while still retaining employees, because that's, at the end of the day, is going to be what's most important, and making sure we still have all hands on deck. We didn't lose one or two people because they broke the policy of PTO.
Absolutely. And I think that's the importance of helping people understand why the policy is what it is, right? And it does have to get changed, because people will game the system, right? They will game the policy, and that just has to be understood and accounted for, and known that that's going to happen, right? That's just life in itself too. So this is what we had to do because of what situations happened in the past, and it's not a negative thing, right? Everything is for the benefit of the overall team, and it's just helping to maybe get some people to understand that. So really understanding the vision.
Definitely. Where does, again, going back to technology, where does technology come into the aspect of communication and making sure that things are communicated quickly and in real time?
Great question, because I think this has changed a lot during COVID, especially. But
Yes.
which tools do we utilize? Now there's so many more tools we keep talking about, whether it's Slack, whether it's now you can email through CRM, you can use email, right? You can use your phone to text message. There's different apps there how to communicate. So it's defining why are you using that particular technology? Why would you send an email when you can send a Slack, right? Or this should be a Slack, this should be an email. And we've had to go through those growing pains to make sure that, okay, here are where the urgent things call. Well, don't call me there for these type of issues. And maybe this needs to be in a team group so that these types of people need to know it. And that's exactly what we work with organizations, right? So we have your executive level that needs to get a certain report or a certain email notification. And then maybe the supervisors, they need to get a text messages, and the employees, right? They need to know that they called out successfully, and they might need their confirmation number in case they need to update that absence, or if it relates to FMLA or return to work policy. So the technology and that communication, I think, has been so much enhanced that it has benefited, I think, everyone involved, as long as you understand the clear use case. Because some companies now, the different labor unions, they're forcing employees to either take ownership and call in and find out what's going on. And other ones, it's reverse. It's up to the company to have to reach out and notify everyone and say, hey, the plant's closed, right, due to whatever case. So there's definitely differences in each end.
Yeah. And, I think there is a bit of a issue of miscommunication, funny enough, between rolling out a new technology or implementing a piece of technology and making sure that your entire staff is using the technology. So everyone can be on the same page. So as a technology company or as a software company, how do you best make sure that, hey, we just onboarded this client and we're going to make sure that they're rolling out the technology? Or how do managers make sure of that every staff member, every team is using this new communication channel?
Another great question. I'm actually deep in this type of work right now. We just onboarded a very large client, and the amount of differences that happen on each call, whether it is FMLA, non-FMLA, sick, and you really have to dive into every scenario. So you're going through the script and you're understanding that employee experience. What are they hitting? What are they entering, right? For January 1st, 2023, if they call out, are they just hitting 1/1/2023? Are they saying it? What are they going into when we're recording their voice? Are they going into too long of an explanation? What should we tweak? And it's really that happy medium, right? Knowing that you're never going to be perfect, right? Even when we have our live agents, you're going to have human error. Somebody's going to type something different, or whatever the case may be, choose the wrong drop down. But it's getting it to that 95%, maybe even 98%, and knowing, okay, here's what happens. So for onboarding, we're reviewing everything. We're looking at all the dashboards. We're reviewing every button push. We're reviewing every recording, every phone call, to make sure that we get it as close to perfect as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really interesting. I asked a question in the polls, how does your organization use technology to mitigate callouts? And I would say almost everybody has said something about, they have my phone number, they can text me. And I'm curious, what are some issues that you might see there, or, even successes that might happen with just good old fashioned texting your manager, hey, I'm not going to be able to come into work for today for reasons A, B, or C?
Absolutely. So I think the emotion, right? Human emotion is the first thing that kicks in from what we hear from our clients. Is it's either, somebody's not coming in, what am I going to do? Or there's a frustration, or it's my friend, now I need to say, okay, right? And when you leave it to a human to kind of make those decisions, it gets difficult, right? And you're putting people in different situations that then is distracting them from their job. And I think that's really one of the powers of this tool, is just have a clear, concise protocol. This is how it is. This is why we do it. And there isn't that back and forth, right? Between those texts. And it's the verification, right? And the compliance. So when you're using our platform, we have every single text message. We know when it was sent. We know what phone number. And that's, half of it. Is really just making sure that you're tracking every single transaction throughout that process.
Yeah. And I think what Abridge Solutions and Workforce does is take the pressure off of the managers at the end of the day, so they can focus on helping out on the floor or, helping the customer, whatever it might be. And instead of dealing with the back of house admin stuff of scrambling to send a group chat to those that are qualified, it's automatically done through softwares like ours. So I think it's really important. And again, communicating that policy and saying, hey, if you guys are calling out, we're going to use this from here on out and pointing to the employee app, anything like that. So yeah, it's very important. To close out, what are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways that you recommend the audience can use to better prevent callouts from happening during the holiday season?
Yeah. Number 1, be proactive as much as possible. Have the tough conversations if they're needed, or just have a conversation, right? Just say, hey, are you going on vacation? What's happening? And making sure that you're tracking the different people, right? Looking at the past. Workforce has great tools just as well as us. You can see all the different metrics and know what's happening. Keep it simple, right? Simple, clear protocols where people don't have to guess, where if they ask another employee's going to know, and you don't have that trickle down effect where everyone's asking somebody else. And then lastly is what gets measured gets managed, right? Mm-hmm. So really making sure that you're measuring what are your key metrics for the attendance that's going to make a difference. If it is sick, are you doing a health and wellness program, right? If it's childcare, are you making sure maybe they're doing, we've seen companies offer Ubers, right, for different situations.
Yeah.
So, figure it out what is happening in your organization, and then use those the tools that we provide to make the smart business decisions.
That's great. That's awesome. I'm going to open the floor up to the Q&A section now. So we're going to go into that, starting with some questions that we have tagged. I think Corinne asked, could you type some of those names out from the tools that we had mentioned earlier? Scott actually went ahead and did that. I'm also happy to send over some, podcasts that I found really helpful from Huberman Labs, anything like that. So I will email you, Corinne. And if anybody is, wanting any more insight, feel free to email me at meredith@workforce.com. I'm happy to share any insight there. Laura asked, so she asked, we are revising our current policies and employee handbook this year. Any resources that you could recommend for us? We are a locally owned small retail business. A consultant would be helpful. Scott, what do you think about that?
Interesting. So I've worked a lot with like Paylocity, ADP, right? Those type of organizations that kind of have the handbook all in place. So, and it's very simple. It's almost cookie cutter. You just have to go through, and it's long and tedious, but they kind of give you the playbook to go ahead. So that might be one of my suggestions. I haven't, since you're a small company, I don't have any particular consultant. I apologize to direct you to.
Yeah, that's great. Laura also asked, we are also considering incentivizing staff to cover shifts when callouts occur by paying them a higher hourly wage for those that cover in a pitch. Are any advice there?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. I think incentives work extremely well. And I think I kind of mentioned it before, it's understanding where the game might be played. And maybe it's, we've seen where some companies, they're offering $100 to $200 if you show up the entire week straight.
Wow.
As a bonus. So then, but that also, then they're gaming the system, because then they're going to take the next week off and they might just Uber, they might do something else, right?
Yeah.
So you really do need to understand, what am I incentivizing? What's the main goal here in the outcome? And then if I do that, where are people then going to start creating their own schedules, right? And knowing they have this extra money, I'm just going to pick up this shift. And how many shifts are they allowed to pick up? So unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all, but that is a great start. And that is what we do in our center to make sure that we are fully staffed for sure.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about incentives in a lot of these webinars. It's a reoccurring topic, especially amongst HR. And hey, what if we throw them a pizza party? What if we, give them a Starbucks gift card every now and then? And I think those are great, but I think it's a lot of Band-Aid solutions, and it's at the end of the day going to run up your labor costs. And again, it's people playing the system. If, hey, I'm going to get rewarded for, possibly missing work at the end of the day, it's hard. So I think things like a point-based attendance solution, something that we actually have just rolled out. We have a whole webinar on it if people are curious as to what the feature looks like. But things like that have been proven a little more effective. Like companies like Chick-fil-A use point-based attendance systems. And I think it's really beneficial, and it has some really interesting studies and statistics on how that looks. So if you're curious, I'm happy to point you in the right direction there. But incentives are rough. as Scott said, it's a lot of people kind of playing the system at the end of the day.
I think the focus is on that and definitely the incentive, but then also the culture, right? Because we've had projects where we've had sprint projects and we've had to bring all the team on for 4 or 6 weeks straight every Saturday, right? And sometimes that camaraderie, that excitement about accomplishing a task might be more beneficial, right? If you have a big client coming on board and then everybody talking about it and kind of doing a recap or celebrating that client. For instance, for us, if we're bringing on a large telecom client and we're all answering it together, maybe we'll do a pizza party and just say, hey, and we'll pull some happy calls.
For sure.
Right? So that might also be another benefit instead of just having to do those incentive based, if you can really kind of drum up that excitement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's for sure room for the pizza party and, and also the points-based attendance system method of, kind of throwing the hammer down a little bit, so to speak. But I think there's a time and place for it where reward is necessary or reward is, given as that being that just an award. So I think there's a time and place for all of it, but I don't necessarily think that time and money should be allocated towards callouts. I think we spend so much time on that as is, and there's better methods out there using technology. So I think, it's just a matter of balancing it a little bit. But yeah, for sure, there's definitely the opportunity for getting rewarded and rewarding your staff for all their hard work. Definitely. Amy had a really great comment and kind of following up with a question. She said, it can be challenging as burnout is very real, especially this time of year. We communicate, we educate, we appreciate, we celebrate. In all my years of doing this, I have never seen so many call outs. I set out an array of resources just in case someone might be struggling with something I might not be aware of, but I'm needing some new ideas. Scott, do you have any thoughts on this? Just mitigating burnout, better resources that can be sent out maybe from HR to the frontline staff.
I think it really starts with, understanding where the burnout's coming from, right? Is it too much work? Are you bringing on a ton of clients? Are people complaining, right? Or is it just life, right? That they're shopping, they have to travel far for work. We have that, right? And allowing people to work from home maybe 1 or 2 days a week, because there's here now, the amount of people that have moved to Charleston, it takes me an hour and a half to go 18 miles to work.
Yeah.
So maybe you come in a later shift, right? And having some of those conversations to really work, I think, with each individual employee would probably be the best place to start.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Again, I think you brought up a really good point. It's understanding the root cause of it at the end of the day is really, really important. And again, that's just kind of the baseline of where burnout comes from. And it can look a lot of different ways. And we go into a lot of burnout type topics in some previous webinars. I'm happy to share those across if anyone's curious, but we have a great consultant come on and talk about how to identify burnout and how it might look across the board. So if anyone's curious,
Heather, I think even just the foods that we eat, right? I used to go to Dunkin' Donuts. I loved my Boston cream donut and, a cup of coffee or Krispy Kreme is here. And it's understanding what that does to your body, right? You might have a huge rush and then you're effective. So how do you roll out maybe a health and wellness program or a nutrition where, hey, here's some energy, right? Maybe some blueberries, or maybe you're going into keto and ketosis and now you have this extra energy. I'm on a 48-hour fast right now. And so I'm all pumped up, right? And I'm ready to roll. So some of those can all kind of play into it.
Yeah, the science behind intermittent fasting is insane for sure. Cool. Heather asked, from a workforce development agency standpoint, do you have any suggestions as to how to decrease callouts or no call, no shows with the temp workers during the holiday season?
So that is a good point with the temps. That's kind of the communication. We don't work directly with the temp agencies. So we work with the organizations, and we haven't really dove into that. That's a good question. From what I've seen, we don't see them come through the system again. So they're out the door, and that communication is handled through the temp agency, whether it's Randstad or Kelly Services or one of the major players. Right.
Yeah. From our end, with a lot of staffing agencies that we work with, it's hard to kind of obviously pin down because the levels are fluctuating constantly throughout the year. I guess what I would say is talking directly to that agency itself and seeing, what other avenues could be explored. I think you'd be surprised just, seeing what their HR might have to say about it. or
And
where they
flipping
might
into the
direct you to.
details, sorry to interrupt,
No, yeah.
was, some of the metrics, right? And that's where we drive down is it the location? Is it the supervisor, right? What department are they in? What facility are they running? What's their job title, right? And then are those correlated to maybe a more often call out or not, is some of the areas that we've seen.
Oh,
Usually
definitely.
it's one department, right, that is the chart's so much higher than some of the other departments, or it's a supervisor for whatever. Scott's employees are always leaving at 2 p.m. on a Friday, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Brandy asked, can you give a resource to learn more about rolling out a points-based attendance system? We actually had a webinar earlier this year, I believe February, on how to get frontline staff to use your HR software. So I'm going to send that over right now. There's the link in the chat. It's really interesting. We actually have our UI UX user experience an interface designer come on and kind of give the background as to why she designed our platform the way that it's designed to bring in more uses and making sure that it's user friendly. We have people that are over 70 years old being able to use our technology, and
awesome.
we have an organization that works with homeless people that don't even have phones that are able to use our employee apps through the iPads and do the kiosk systems that we use. So feel free to check that out. It has some really good pointers. We have an implementation consultant come on. Two of them actually come on and talk a little bit about some best practices that they've seen within hourly workforce. So feel free to explore that, and I'm happy to send over more resources. Scott, I don't know if you had any resources that you'd like to share.
I don't have any specific to the point systems, to be honest, but it sounds like you nailed it for the most part.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can Google. I would just find what we do is we Google the different industries that we're in for the different policies, and then kind of match up and see, and really just take my clients and figure out what they're doing. But I'm happy to dive in if you're in an industry that we work with specifically and tell you what our clients are doing. And
for sure. Yeah, definitely. And speaking of industries that you work with, Debbie asked, what tips do you have for absenteeism in the manufacturing environment? We don't have the ability to stop the line due to callouts.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think it's what are you measuring, right? Why are people calling out? What shift are they calling out? From what we see, it's usually the first shift is significantly more. So maybe do you need to have a backup plan? Do you need to have temps? We are seeing a lot of our manufacturing companies bring in temps. Now I'm building out multiple databases for specific temp agencies of people calling out. During COVID, it was wild. Before COVID, it was 3 to 5% of your workforce called out. Now we've seen almost up to 15% of people calling out.
Oh my God.
There are some real stats where you do need to have kind of those backup staffs, and keeping that awareness with the team and the communication.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.